When I started working here about 6 years ago, I was the only one in my extended family, along of course with Nick, who attended church at all. It's often true when I go and I meet somebody new, as I did yesterday at the library, I introduced myself. This young woman asked me what I did. I was like, well, I'm actually a pastor in Medfield. The conversation ended. So it's easy to feel alone when you're trying to follow God. Things can be awkward when you're the only one in your family or your friendship circle that does church. Last week, Pastor Phil asked the question, are faith and reason opposed? He outlined some arguments that assured us that, in fact, faith and reason are opposed, but opposed like our fingers and thumb are opposed. They must work together to allow us to grasp the complicated realities of life. Indeed, it is not only the religious who use faith, as Phil pointed out. The underlying suppositions that support reasoned scientific investigation are grounded in ultimately unprovable beliefs also. Phil likewise encouraged us that truly meaningful belief must also be grounded in reason. Phil and I are doing a sermon series based on this book by Timothy Keller called Making Sense of God. And we encourage anybody who's interested to pick it up for yourselves and read it as kind of a complement to these sermons. I think you will find it challenging and hopefully encouraging, as he and I have found. Now, one of the elephants in a church is fear that our belief is irrational, maybe even stupid. Another of these fears that we have is that maybe nobody really believes this stuff anyway. Or to put it another way, isn't religion really just going away? So that's the hard question we will be asking this week. A couple of decades ago, leading scholars in Western society were nearly unanimous in thinking that religion was inevitably declining. They thought the need for religion would go away as science provided explanations and aid against the natural elements better than religion could. While, as we will see, their prediction did not in fact come true, the sentiment is prevalent, very prevalent in our media, amongst our friends, and perhaps even in our pews on a Sunday morning. We might have this uncomfortable niggle in our head that maybe we are part of an outdated, old-fashioned, and disappearing worldview. Can I get a head nod if you've ever wondered this? And just as fear of being stupid might make it hard to truly dig into our faith, the fear that we are on the losing team can also be a barrier to investigating our faith. Nobody bets all their money on a team that they don't trust will win. This question reminded me of the Old Testament prophet Elijah, who at one point in his life, he felt the same way. Elijah was charged with being God's voice to Israel at a time when both the prophets of Israel and the leaders of Israel were denying the very premise of Israel itself, that God was one and that he should be worshiped. Instead, a multitude of gods were being worshiped depending on where in Israel you lived or what suited your own needs. Sure, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was okay. But let me tell you about the parties we throw for Baal, who was another of the gods that was being worshipped at that time. Elijah, depressed and exhausted, we read in verses 4 and 5, came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. Elijah wanted to give up. He was tired of running the religious rat race, tired of receiving subtle jabs when he didn't participate in what everyone else was doing, or even overt threats to his life when he asserted that there was one God alone to be worshipped. Feeling like you are on a religious island alone is exhausting. However, as the story continues in the text, an angel visited Elijah and told him to eat for strength. Then he went to the mountain of God. God asks him what he is doing there, and he says, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." God instructs him to go back the way he came and to delegate some of the burdens he had been carrying alone. He is to anoint a new king over Aram and a new king over Israel, and to anoint a prophet to succeed him. They will take care of those who are disobedient. Then God says this in verse 18, "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." There are 7,000 believers in Israel, Elijah. Go and be with them. Take care of yourself and be encouraged. Now, I wonder if you can relate to Elijah. I know I can. It's easy to feel like you are the only one trying to get to worship on a Sunday. Can I get a head nod? Yet, many studies have pointed out that when we look beyond our borders, we see that the world is actually becoming more religious, not less. A while back, the Washington Post ran an article titled, "The World is Expected to Become More Religious, Not Less," based on a new study by the Pew Research Center, while acknowledging that in the United States and Europe, the percentage of people without religious affiliation will be rising for the time being. The article distilled the research findings, namely that in the world, overall, religion is growing steadily and strongly. Christianity, along with Islam as well, will make up the increasing percentage of the world population, while the proportion that is secular or without belief will shrink. And it is not the case, as us first worlders might imagine, that this growth is only amongst the poor and uneducated. Sociologists have found that countries such as China are becoming more religious and, in fact, Christian, even as they modernize. How do we balance what we see in our communities in New England with the worldwide trend of increasing religiosity? Now listen closely to this quote from Tim Keller as he summarizes what has in fact been the impact of modernity, especially in America. He says, "The individualism of modern culture does not necessarily lead to a decline in religion. Rather, it leads to a decline of inherited religion, the sort one is born into. What is not declining in modern societies is chosen religion, religion based not on ethnicity or solely on upbringing, but on personal decision. Just as it is no longer expected that we will go into our parents' professions, increasingly Americans do not go to church just because it is what their parents did. Cultural religion is on decline. Not only is inherited religion in decline and chosen religion growing, but many social scientists have been surprised to discover what kind of religion is in fact thriving. In the early part of the 20th century, sociologists predicted that if religion was not going to die out altogether, then it would be the milder forms that would survive the rise of secularism. In the 60s and 70s, this belief led to many attempts to tie together Christian and secular worldviews to create a Christian faith that was palatable to secularism. Yet, based on the current trend in religion, in the words of Tim Keller, the very liberal, moderate forms of religion that most secular people think are the most likely to survive will not. It is the kind of faith that is dying out most quickly in the world. Meanwhile, the faiths that rely on conversion are growing exponentially. So as you dig into the studies, you find the more that clergy and the congregation believe the Bible to be true, the more growth the researchers found in the church. So passive faith becomes no faith, but active faith grows deeper. In the past, the church was a place people sought out for many reasons, religious, moral, or social. Today, we come to church to find God. We don't have time to come to church for anything else. It is the dispassion of the middle that doesn't return from summer vacation. Look, our friends may raise an eyebrow when we leave a party early on Saturday so we can get to church on Sunday, or if we're late for a birthday party because we wanted to get our kids to church. This is because the culture is sending a very strong message right now. It is foolish to believe in the losing team. As a respected scholar, Mark Lilla has suggested, to most humans, curiosity about higher things comes naturally. It's indifference to them that must be learned. So this is the good news, that actually belief in something is a more natural state of things. Strict secularism holds that people are only physical entities without souls, that when loved ones die, they simply cease to exist, that sensations of love and beauty are just neurological chemical events, that there is no right or wrong outside of what we in our minds determine and choose. These are actually not necessarily intuitive positions, yet we've bought into them in many subtle ways, usually unknowingly and without consideration. Our church is doing well considering all that is happening in our culture. It is full of people who some have inherited faith, but many and most have made it their own. Sitting in this room, if we asked each other, we would find that everyone has a reason they are here. Gone are the days when people attended church just because. What a tremendous opportunity. We are filled with incredible stories of faith. We have tremendous capacity to help our children to choose meaningful faith, faith of both the mind and the heart. We must stand guard if this is what we are trying to do. If watered down belief and inherited faith are in decline, what then does it say about how we should live our faith? First, it will be increasingly important for us to develop spiritual friendships in order to maintain our faith, in order to stay encouraged, in order that we don't feel like we're the only ones trying to get to worship on a Sunday morning. That is why we offer adult ed groups. We have a new one starting in February, led by Margie Getz. On Monday nights, we have some new adult ed studies. One in particular is, I couldn't say, it's just such a great study. It's the best study I have encountered in my 10 years of ministry to this point, called What is the Bible? Phil's going to be leading it Thursday nights starting this week. It's totally worth your time. So first, we have to challenge ourselves to build relationships of faith. Second, we must find ways to go deeper into the specifics of our faith and to develop a deep belief in the truth of what we believe. This is why Phil and I have become increasingly focused on helping all of us feel confident in reading the Bible, which is the source book and benchmark for what Christians believe. And finally, instead of hoping faith will be passed on to our children, we must be ready to give a reason for why we get them here on a Sunday. We have to know enough about what we believe that we can answer at least some of their very difficult questions. The cure to decline and the stagnation of religion is committed faith. So my question is this: are you among the committed? If you say no, my question is, what's standing in your way? And how can we help you get there? This is so important. Now, if you are among the committed, or if you're leaning in that direction, there's hope. Remember that out of the 7,000 that God had set apart during Elijah's day, has blossomed the millions of Christians that are alive and growing with us today. Remember that Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must never lose infinite hope. Ultimately, we are on the winning team." Amen.